My daughter returned home on her wedding night covered in blood. Her mother-in-law had slapped her 40 times, demanding she hand over the deed to a condo worth $1.5 million that we had given her as a dowry. With bloodshot eyes, I called my ex-husband. "Your daughter is being abused." At 3:00 the morning, violent, hurried banging echoed against the door, as if someone were ramming their entire body against the reinforced wood. I was lying on the sofa. I had barely managed to doze off for a couple of hours when I woke up with a start. My heart was pounding with runaway force. Who could it be at this hour? And knocking like that? Before I could even open my mouth to ask, a stifled sob came from outside, familiar to the point of pain. "Mom, open up, please." It was my daughter Sarah's voice. I jumped up and ran barefoot to the door. My whole body was trembling as I looked through the peephole. The image I saw almost made me collapse right there. Sarah was standing on the landing, her hair a mess and her wedding dress, which was no longer white, stained with streaks of dark red. On her face, 5 bruised finger marks were clearly etched. Her cheek was swollen, her lip split, and blood was still dripping from the corner of her mouth. My hands shook so much that I tried to put the key in the lock several times without success. As soon as the door opened, Sarah collapsed onto me. Her body was freezing, shaking uncontrollably, as if she had just stepped out of a blizzard. "Mom, they beat me." She barely finished the sentence before she fainted in my arms, becoming dead weight. "Sarah! Sarah!" I screamed, hugging her in panic. When I touched her back, I felt a large wet patch. I pulled my hand away, and when I looked at it, it was covered in blood. I carried her to the sofa, moving clumsily, my mind blank. My daughter's face was pale, her lips bruised, one of her cheeks terribly swollen, and she could barely open her eyes. Trembling, I grabbed the phone to dial 911. Just at that moment, Sarah grabbed my hand tightly. "Mom, don't call. Don't take me to the hospital." I leaned over her. "What do you mean, no? Look at you. How are you going to endure this?" Her voice was weak, broken. "They say if I dare go to the hospital, they'll kill me." A lump formed in my throat. "Who?" Sarah closed her eyes tightly, and tears welled up. "My mother-in-law, Mrs. Eleanor Vance." Just hearing that name sent a chill down my spine. My daughter swallowed hard, her voice shaking as if she had a high fever. She slapped me 40 times. She demanded I transfer the $1.5 million condo to her name, or she would beat me to death. Hearing this, I felt a buzzing in my ears, and the room spun. $1.5 million. It was the condo that was in Sarah's name, the only asset her father had left her after our divorce 10 years ago. That apartment in the Gold Coast neighborhood of Chicago, valued exactly at $1.5 million, was the only security for my daughter's future. "How is that possible?" I asked with a choked voice as I wiped the blood from her face. "But wasn't today your wedding day?" Sarah broke down crying, sobbing convulsively. "Mom, I was wrong. I didn't listen to you. I thought you were jealous because I was marrying a rich man. I didn't know I was walking into the lion's den." I hugged her tightly. Sarah spoke slowly, with interruptions, but every word was like a knife tearing me apart inside. 3 months ago, she introduced me to her boyfriend. His name was Jason, a tall, well-dressed man who drove a luxury car and entered the house with a radiant smile. "Hello, ma'am. You look so young. You look like Sarah's older sister." Sarah, beside him, smiled so happily that her eyes crinkled. "See, Mom? Jason treats me wonderfully." At that moment, I only smiled out of politeness, but inside I felt a vague unease. His gaze was too sharp, his smile too perfect. The second time Jason came to the house, he brought his mother, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, a woman dressed in a flashy manner with a thick gold necklace and heavy bracelets on her wrists. As soon as she entered, she scanned the house with her eyes, making no attempt to hide her inquisitive curiosity. "I heard your ex-husband is a big shot in real estate, that he left a good inheritance to your daughter, right?" Her direct question left me frozen. I replied coldly, "My ex-husband's money has nothing to do with your family." She smiled, but her smile held no kindness. "Oh, woman, I'm just asking out of curiosity. If my son marries your daughter, I need to know what kind of circles she moves in." Sarah intervened quickly, taking my hand. "Mom, Mrs. Vance was just asking, don't get angry." In that instant, I looked at my daughter, and she seemed like a stranger. She, who had always been so sensible, was blind with love, defending a stranger. Later, Mrs. Vance shamelessly proposed a wedding gift of $200,000. I refused immediately. "I am not selling my daughter. I do not accept that money." But Sarah begged me through tears. "Mom, Jason's family has a lot of money. $200,000 isn't that much to them. Please, accept it." In the end, I gave in and lowered it to $100,000 on the condition that the condo in Sarah's name would not be touched after the marriage. Mrs. Vance smiled from ear to ear, repeating, of course, whatever the bride's family says." Now, remembering it, I realize how evident her greed was at that moment, but I wasn't lucid enough to see it. Sarah sobbed in my lap. "Mom, tonight after the reception, they took me to the room. I thought a new life was beginning." Her voice broke. I squeezed her hand, sensing that what I was about to hear would be even more terrible than the wounds on her body. Sarah cried so hard she curled up in my arms. I clearly felt her tremors transmitting to my chest, as if her fear were devouring me too. "Mom, when the party ended, Jason took me to the room." Her voice grew weak and broken. I moved closer, pressing my ear to hear every word. "I thought we were finally alone. I even sat down to wait for him." Sarah took a deep breath, and her tears fell onto my blouse. "But he went out, saying he had something to do." I waited almost half an hour. I closed my eyes, my heart shrinking. "And then what, honey?" I barely finished the question when Sarah clung to my clothes, her voice shattered. My mother-in-law burst into the room, and behind her were Jason's aunt and other women, 7 or 8 in total. I felt a chill run down my back. They locked the door. Sarah broke down crying again. Before I could understand what was happening, Mrs. Vance grabbed me by the hair and slammed me against the bed. I couldn't stop it. My hands started shaking. She asked me when I was going to put the $1.5 million condo in her name. Sarah shook her head as she spoke. I told her it was an asset my parents had left me, that I couldn't transfer it. As soon as I said it, she slapped me. My daughter choked, unable to breathe. 1, then 2, and like that, one after another. I counted up to 40 slaps. I felt as if someone were squeezing my heart. Every time she hit me, the other women counted aloud and laughed. Sarah's voice had become a thread. They said that one slap wasn't enough for being disobedient. You have to teach her a lesson so she learns. I gritted my teeth so hard I drew blood. And Jason? Where was he? Sarah remained silent for a long time. Her hot tears fell onto my hand. He was outside, at the door. That simple sentence was the deepest stab. I heard him tell his mother, "Mom, don't hit her in the face. It leaves marks and it'll look ugly." I couldn't hold back a stifled moan. "My God," Sarah sobbed. After that, they didn't hit me in the face anymore. They used coat hangers, slippers. They beat me on my back, on my arms. My daughter shook uncontrollably. I begged them. I told them I really couldn't transfer the condo, that it was my mother and father's entire life. I covered my mouth with my hand, crying uncontrollably. She said if I didn't agree, she would rip my clothes off and throw me into the street so the whole neighborhood could see me, claiming I was a scammer who married them to steal from them. Carefully, I pulled the blanket to cover Sarah well. The wedding dress was torn at the back, revealing her bruised skin, with the marks of the blows so visible I didn't dare look for long. "And how did you manage to escape?" Sarah breathed with difficulty. One of them said it would bring bad luck to kill someone on the wedding night, and only then did she stop. My daughter managed a bitter smile. She warned me I had 3 days, only 3 days. If I didn't transfer the condo, she would let Jason educate me again. I clenched my fists. I was so scared. I put the wedding dress back on in secret and ran out. I didn't dare go back to their house. Sarah buried her head in my chest, crying her eyes out. "Mom, I'm scared." I hugged her with all my might. At that moment, my own image from 10 years ago came to mind, also oppressed by my mother-in-law, also choosing to endure, also consoling myself that it would all pass. But in the end, the more I endured, the more they cornered me. I stroked my daughter's hair and said with a firm voice, "Sarah, listen to me. This cannot be tolerated, she started. But if I report it to the police, they'll say I fell. His family has lawyers. I looked her directly in the eyes. You are afraid. I understand. But if you stay silent, they won't stop. I stood up and grabbed a clean towel to dry her face. Tonight you stay here. No one will touch you again. Sarah looked at me with eyes full of confusion. What are you going to do, Mom? I took a deep breath. Only one person was in my mind. The man who once hurt me, but also the only one capable of protecting our daughter at this moment. I picked up the phone to call her father. Sarah opened her eyes wide. Mom, Dad hasn't contacted us in 10 years. I remained calm. But you are his daughter. I dialed his number. My hand trembled slightly, but my voice, when the ringtone sounded, was strangely serene. On the other end, someone picked up. Hello. A raspy, familiar voice sounded. I spoke slowly, articulating every word clearly. Robert, your daughter has been beaten half to death. There was a silence of several seconds on the other end of the line. Send me the address. I'm coming over. The call ended, brief and concise. I turned to Sarah. This is not going to stay like this. My daughter took my trembling hand, but in her look, there was something different, as if she had grabbed onto a life preserver. At this point, I would like to say to everyone listening to this story something from the bottom of my heart. I ask you to please show your support with a like and by subscribing to the channel. I wish you all health and peace. Your support is the engine that drives me to keep telling these life stories, with the hope that every tale can help someone be stronger. I went back to the sofa and sat next to my daughter all night. Outside, the wind blew icy through the cracks in the windows, but inside me, a dormant flame had begun to burn. This time, I would not allow my daughter to repeat the path of suffering I once walked. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I knew the real storm had just begun. The doorbell rang again, dry and determined. I got up with my heart pounding. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a dark jacket, messy hair, and a face haggard from haste. Although 10 years had passed, I recognized him instantly. It was Robert. I opened the door, and before I could say anything, he entered quickly. His gaze swept the room and stopped at the sofa. Sarah lay there, wrapped in a blanket, with her face swollen and bruised, her lips battered, and a crust of dried blood at the corner of her mouth. Sarah. Robert's voice trembled. He rushed toward her and knelt by her side. His hand reached out and stopped in the air, as if he feared hurting her more by touching her. Daughter, how are you? Sarah opened her eyes. Seeing her father, she broke down crying. Dad. With just that word, Robert's tears began to fall. I stood behind them with a lump in my throat. 10 years ago, when we divorced, he stood like that, too silent, helpless. I never imagined he would reappear in a situation like this. Robert turned to me with bloodshot eyes. What happened? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, and told him everything Sarah had told me. As he listened, his face grew paler. When I mentioned the 40 slaps and the $1.5 million condo, he clenched his fists so hard his veins popped out. Bastards! He jumped up and slammed his hand on the table, making the glass vibrate. Which family? Who are they? The family of Jason Vance. They want the condo in Sarah's name, the one in the Gold Coast? Robert took out his phone immediately. Send me that scumbag's address right now. I hesitated. Robert, what are you going to do? He looked directly at me, with a terrifying coldness in his eyes. I'm not going to cause a scene. I'm going to do things according to the law. He turned to Sarah, softening his voice. Relax, sweetie. Dad is here. No one will touch you again. Sarah took his hand, trembling. I'm scared. They say if I report it to the police. Robert leaned in and squeezed her hand. Listen to me. With these people, the more afraid you are, the more they attack you. This time, I won't let anyone hurt you. He went out to the balcony and started making calls non-stop. I heard snatched phrases. Hello, Detective Miller. I need you to investigate a family. The Vances, real estate sector. Yes, as much detail as possible. Before hanging up, he was already dialing another number. Laura, I need the best domestic violence and divorce attorney. Can we file the complaint tomorrow morning? I looked at him, inevitably remembering 10 years ago. Back then, facing pressure from his mother and sister, he chose silence. Today, for his daughter, he seemed like a different person. Robert came back in with a grave voice. "Rest tonight. I'll take care of the rest." I nodded, though inside I remained uneasy. What if they come looking for her? He smiled coldly. "Let them come." That smile gave me a chill. Almost at dawn, Sarah fell asleep from exhaustion. I, sitting next to her, couldn't sleep a wink. In my mind, the furious face of Mrs. Vance, the slaps, the threats kept appearing. I knew this wouldn't end well. Around 7:00 the morning, Robert's phone rang. He went to a corner to answer, and his expression darkened. I understand. Send me all the documentation." When he hung up, he looked at me. "That family is drowning in debt. Their real estate firm has overdue loans with the bank. They are about to go bankrupt. Sarah's condo was their salvation." I froze. Then he nodded. "They didn't marry for love. They married to steal." That sentence made me shudder. Just at that moment, shouts were heard from the street. I went out to the balcony to look. Down on the sidewalk was Mrs. Vance screaming, flanked by Jason and several relatives. "Sarah, you tramp! Get down here!" What a shameless little. Her shrill screams caused neighbors to start looking out. Jason looked up at the balcony. When he saw Robert and me, his face changed color. Robert went out and stood firm, looking down with glacial coldness. "Have you caused enough of a scene?" Mrs. Vance raised her head abruptly. "And who are you?" Robert replied briefly. "I am Sarah's father." She froze for a second and then let out a mocking laugh. "Father? What father? Your daughter tricked my son into marriage and now dares to run back to her mother's house." Robert didn't flinch. "You gave my daughter 40 slaps, and now you have the nerve to come here and talk about morality?" Mrs. Vance turned pale. She fell on her own. "I was just educating my daughter-in-law." Robert held up his phone. "I have all the photos of her injuries saved. If you want, we can call the police to clear it up." Jason took a step forward. "Sir, this is a family matter. Let's not make it bigger." Robert stared at him. "Family? When your mother was beating your wife and you stayed outside the door, what kind of family is that?" Jason was left speechless. Mrs. Vance started screaming again. "If there is no one, $5 million condo, you will have no peace." Robert smiled coldly. "Dare to touch my daughter one more time." At that precise instant, police sirens sounded at the end of the street. 2 cruisers stopped, and several officers got out, heading directly toward the group. We received a call for disturbing the peace. Mrs. Vance turned livid. "I was just coming to talk." An officer stared at her. Screaming and threatening is not talking. Robert went down and handed his phone to a police officer. "These are the photos of the injuries my daughter suffered last night." The atmosphere changed immediately. Jason stepped back, his face as pale as paper. I clung to the railing from the balcony, feeling a mixture of fear and relief. I knew that from that moment, the wheel of fate had begun to turn in another direction. Sarah woke up and came to my side. She looked down, trembling. "Mom, I'm scared." I hugged her. "Don't be afraid. This has only just begun." The atmosphere on the street became dense with the arrival of the police. Mrs. Vance, who hadn't stopped screaming, fell silent suddenly, her mouth open but emitting no sound. Jason, behind his mother, was pale as death, fists clenched as if trying to stay upright. The relatives who were cheering before were now stepping away, not daring to look straight ahead. An officer looked around and asked with a stern voice, "Who is the assaulted person?" Robert turned and called out, "Sarah, come down." I squeezed my daughter's hand. "You don't have to go down if you're not ready." Robert nodded and turned back to the police. "My daughter has serious injuries. I will give you the medical report and photographs, but I demand a report be filed right here." The officer nodded. "Agreed. Please cooperate." They took notes, took photos, asked every detail. I, from the balcony, watched with my heart still racing, but without the initial panic. I clearly saw that the tables had turned. "Mrs. Vance changed her tone from screaming to wailing. "Officer, if it's just a family matter, a small lesson for the daughter-in-law." A police officer interrupted her. Educating does not include causing physical injury. Speak less. Jason stepped forward, lowering his voice. Officer, my wife really fell, Robert said coldly. Shut up. When they were beating her, you stayed outside the door. Now you say she fell? Jason lowered his head without answering. Finally, the police required Mrs. Vance and Jason to accompany them to the precinct. As they were putting them in the car, Mrs. Vance turned and looked toward the balcony with an expression of hate and panic. Sarah, remember this. This isn't over. Robert stood firm with a cutting voice. You should worry about yourself first. The car drove away, leaving behind only the curious stares of the neighbors. The door to our house closed, and the silence became strangely heavy. Sarah sat on the sofa as if her strength had run out. She was trembling, but in her eyes, there was a new glint. It wasn't just fear anymore. Mom, I did wrong. I sat next to her and hugged her. You did wrong not to trust your instinct and not to trust me, but you didn't do wrong in choosing to protect yourself. Sarah nodded, and tears rolled down her cheeks. Robert pulled up a chair and sat opposite us with a grave voice. Sarah, listen to your father. This morning we are going to do 3 things. She looked up. 3 things. First, go to a forensic doctor to certify your injuries. Second, file a report for domestic violence. And third, file the divorce papers. The last sentence made Sarah freeze. Divorce, Dad? Robert stared at her. Do you want to go back to that house? Sarah remained silent. I saw her hands trembling. It's good to be afraid. It's the right thing. A place that scares you is not a home. I added, Sarah, I once endured thinking it was for the good of the family. The result was that I lost 10 years of my life. I don't want you to repeat my history. My daughter looked at me and then at Robert. After a long while, she nodded. I'll do what you say. That morning, the Chicago sky clouded over, and it started to rain. Heavy drops fell on the gray asphalt. We took Sarah to the hospital for the medical examination. When the doctor lifted her blouse, the purple marks and bruises were so extensive that both Robert and I had to look away. The doctor shook his head. She has received multiple blows with great force. There are evident signs of severe abuse. Robert signed the report with a slightly trembling hand. Afterwards, we went to the police station. Sarah recounted everything that happened, every detail, every slap, every threat. Every time she stopped, I squeezed her hand tightly. When she signed the complaint, she stared at the paper for a long time. Mom, from this moment on, I'm not Jason's wife anymore, right? I stroked her hair. You are still yourself. Only you have escaped a trap. At noon, we went to court to file the unilateral divorce lawsuit. Jason wasn't there, but his lawyer had sent a request for mediation. Robert read it and smiled coldly. Mediation after giving his wife 40 slaps? Do they think the law is a joke? The lawyer looked at us with a restrained voice. The other party wishes to negotiate. There is nothing to negotiate, Robert cut in. Divorce. My daughter's assets remain as they are. Furthermore, we will request compensation for moral damages. I looked at Sarah. She took a deep breath and said clearly, I agree with Dad. That afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop ringing, always unknown numbers. When I picked up, Mrs. Vance's raspy and threatening voice resonated. You showed off, huh? You dared to call the police? I replied calmly. You should speak through your lawyer. Don't think that because you have your ex-husband behind you, you're going to win anything. I hung up. My hand was shaking, but I felt a strange relief. I knew the road ahead would be full of obstacles, but we had already crossed the most important line. That night, Sarah was in bed, and I sat next to her. She whispered, Mom, if I had listened to you that day. I shook my head. There are no ifs. The important thing is that now you have woken up. Outside, the rain kept falling, but in our small house, for the first time in days, I felt a fragile peace. I knew Jason's family wouldn't give up easily, and I also knew the true storm was yet to come. That night, Sarah slept in intervals. She would fall asleep for a while and wake up startled with her back soaked in sweat. I sat by the bed with my hand on her shoulder, and as soon as she moved, I noticed. Each time I patted her and whispered, Relax, Mom is here. But I understood that skin wounds can heal, but scars on the soul are not easy to erase. Near midnight, my phone vibrated, an unknown number. I hesitated for a few seconds and answered, "Hello." On the other end, there was a brief silence, and then the deep, cold voice of a man. "Are you Sarah's mother?" "It's me. I am the lawyer for the Vance family." I let out a bitter laugh. "At this hour? Why are you calling? The other party wishes to speak in private to avoid the matter getting bigger." I looked at my daughter, who was sleeping fitfully. "There is nothing to discuss in private. Everything will be resolved before the law." The man's voice softened. "You should reconsider. If this goes further, Sarah's reputation will also be affected." I gripped the phone. "My daughter's reputation was trampled by you people on her wedding night. Don't use the word reputation to threaten me." I hung up without waiting for an answer. Less than 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time it was Jason's number. I hesitated, but ended up answering. "Ma'am," his voice was hoarse, "could you let me talk to Sarah? I just want to apologize to her." I took a deep breath. "You have no right. I know I was wrong, but my mother," I interrupted him. "You were wrong not because of your mother, but because you stood watching while others beat your wife." Silence fell on the other end. "Sarah is not going to talk to you. From now on, everything goes through the lawyers." I hung up and turned off the phone. In that instant, I noticed my hand was shaking, not from fear, but from rage. The next morning, Robert returned early with a thick sheaf of papers in his hand. He left it on the table with a serious gesture. "The other party's lawyer has started spreading rumors." "What rumors?" "That Sarah left home of her own free will. That it was just a small couple's argument over money. That his family never mistreated her." I let out a bitter laugh. "They have no shame," Robert nodded. "And that's not all. They insinuate that Sarah married for money and that upon not getting what she wanted, she invented all this." Sarah, who was at her bedroom door, heard everything. Her face turned pale. "Dad, are they saying that about me?" Robert looked at his daughter, softening his gaze. "Don't worry about that. One who has done nothing has nothing to fear." But I knew those words weren't enough. Public opinion is a double-edged sword. It can save or destroy a person. At noon, the neighbors started whispering. Coming back from the market, I heard some women on the corner commenting, "They say that girl, newlywed and already left her husband. Who knows who's right, but what an ugly mess." I passed by them without saying anything, but with a shrinking heart. Sarah had suffered enough. I didn't want people's tongues to hurt her more. That afternoon, Robert proposed, "We need to take the initiative." "How?" "Making the truth public." I looked at him. "Do you really want to magnify it?" He nodded. "If we don't do it, they will twist the story. Sarah will always be the culprit in people's eyes." Sarah remained silent for a long time. Finally, she spoke with a low but firm voice. "I don't want to keep hiding. I haven't done anything wrong." Hearing her, I felt a lump in my throat. Robert immediately called the lawyer to prepare all the documentation, the injury report, the photos of the wounds, the statements, the threatening messages. That night, when everything was ready, Robert published a statement on social media without melodrama, without sensationalism, just the raw truth. My daughter was the victim of a brutal assault on her wedding night. She received 40 slaps for refusing to hand over an asset that belongs to her. We have turned to justice to protect her. As soon as it was published, my phone started vibrating nonstop. Messages, calls, both of support and curiosity. In just an hour, the post had been shared hundreds of times. Comments started raining in. "How can someone be so cruel? Hitting your wife on her wedding night is intolerable. Stay strong, girl." I read and tears fell. Not from pain, but because for the first time I felt that my daughter wasn't alone. But that same night, an anonymous account sent me a message. "Don't think that because you publish those things, it's all over." I froze. Robert saw the message, and his face darkened. "They've started threatening. I'm scared." He put a hand on my shoulder. "Don't be afraid. From now on, we won't back down." Sarah, who was behind, had heard it all. She approached and took both our hands. "I don't want to keep hiding in the dark. If they want a war, they'll get one." Seeing the look in my daughter's eyes at that moment, I realized she was no longer the fragile young woman who had returned home with the bloodied wedding dress. Little by little, she was learning to stand tall. Night fell. I sat alone on the balcony. The city remained lit, the traffic noisy, as if no tragedy had occurred. I understood that the storm approaching would be even greater, but this time I wasn't alone, and neither was my daughter. I knew that tomorrow the Vance family wouldn't sit idly by, and that the true confrontation had just begun. The next morning I woke up while it was still getting light. I had barely slept. The phone on the table wouldn't stop vibrating with notifications, but I didn't dare look at it immediately. I feared cruel words, pitiless judgments. However, when I opened it, the first thing I saw were messages of support. "Ma'am, I read your story and my heart breaks. Be strong, don't let them intimidate you." I let out a sigh, but before I could calm down, Robert's phone rang. He answered, and his face turned serious. "Yes, I know. Let me handle it." When he hung up, he turned to me. "Last night's post is spreading very fast." "How fast?" I didn't dare ask. "The other party has already reacted." "What have they done?" They published a response saying Sarah left home in the middle of the night over an argument about money and that she invented the beating to extort them. I clenched my fists. What nerve! Sarah came out of her room. She had heard everything. She was pale, but her voice was strangely calm. "Dad, Mom, I don't want to keep hiding. If they say that about me, I want to respond." I turned to her. "Are you sure? Public opinion is very harsh." Sarah nodded. "If I stay silent, they'll say silence grants consent. I haven't done anything wrong." Robert looked at his daughter for a long time and then nodded. "Okay, but we will do it with the truth and with proof." Less than an hour later, social media was burning. The Vance family's post was being shared with comments of all kinds. There were people defending Sarah, but others threw cold phrases. "Dirty laundry should be washed at home. Why take it to the internet?" "Who knows? Maybe it's all for money." I read, and my hands shook. I wanted to respond, to scream everything my daughter had suffered, but Robert stopped me. "Don't rush. An emotional reaction will only give them more ammo." At noon, the lawyer called. The other party's family was under pressure. Their company was starting to be investigated. Investigated? They work in real estate, but their finances aren't clean. "This story has attracted too much attention." Robert smiled bitterly. "Just as I expected." That afternoon, Sarah decided to write her own post, not to attack, but to tell her story. She sat in front of the laptop and typed slowly. I, standing behind, felt my heart shrink with every line. "I am Sarah. I thought that by enduring I could save my marriage." She recounted the wedding night, the slaps, the fear of being locked in, her husband's indifference, without embellishments, without insults, just the truth. When the post appeared, I held my breath. In minutes, hundreds of comments. Reading this makes my hair stand on end. "A husband who stays silent is worse than the one who hits. This girl is very brave." But there were also malicious comments. And the proof? "Don't believe just one version." Sarah read them with red eyes. I took her hand. "You don't have to answer everything." Robert handed her his phone. "It's time to show the proof." The lawyer published the injury report, the photos of the bruises, the police report. Everything clear, irrefutable. The atmosphere on the networks changed quickly. Those who doubted fell silent. Apologies started appearing. "Sorry for judging you so fast. It's incredible." At night, I received a call from a stranger. "Are you Sarah's mother?" "Yes, I am a journalist. We would like to verify the information." I looked at Robert. He nodded. "We are willing to talk, but we will only speak the truth." The article was published late at night without sensationalist headlines. It simply recounted the case from a legal perspective, but it was enough. The next morning, the name of the Vance company appeared on various forums. People started bringing to light delayed projects, bank debts. Robert's phone rang. It was Jason. "Sir, what you are doing is driving my family to ruin." Robert replied coldly. "It was you and your mother who drove my daughter to ruin first. I beg you to let me see Sarah." Robert looked at his daughter. Sarah shook her head. "I have nothing more to discuss," Robert said sharply. "Talk to the lawyers." When he hung up, Sarah sat absently. "Mom, I didn't think this would go so far." I hugged her. "You only told the truth. If the truth destroys them, it's not your fault." That night, a strong storm broke out. Standing by the window, I watched the water pour down. I had mixed feelings. I suffered for my daughter, but I was also afraid. afraid that when the media storm passed, the scars on her heart would still be there. Robert approached. "Do you regret making it public?" I shook my head. "If I could go back, I would do the same." He sighed. 10 years ago, I didn't defend you. This time, I couldn't leave my daughter alone. I said nothing. Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside, for the first time in days, I felt a slight relief. I knew public opinion was on our side, but I also knew the Vance family wouldn't give up, and that cornered, their reaction would be even more violent. 3 days after the story went viral, the atmosphere at home was tense. The phone didn't stop ringing, people calling to give support, others out of curiosity, some with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. I stopped answering most calls, keeping contact only with the lawyer and the police. Sarah spoke little, ate better, and slept more deeply, but her gaze was often lost in the void. I knew that on the outside she was calmer, but inside there were still many broken pieces to put back together. That morning, Robert received a long call. When he hung up, he left the phone on the table, thoughtful. The Vances are starting to crumble. How? The bank is claiming their debts, partners have broken contracts, shareholders are demanding explanations. I kept silent. I felt no joy or satisfaction, just profound fatigue. "And what will they do now?" Robert looked at me. "They will try by all means to silence this story. And the fastest way," he stopped, "is to counterattack." He barely finished speaking when the doorbell rang. I jumped. Sarah, who was in her room, also came out. The three of us looked at each other. I went to open it. In front of me was a middle-aged man, well-dressed, with an exhausted face. "Good morning. I am Richard Vance, Jason's father." I stared at him. "What do you want?" he sighed. "Can I come in to talk?" Robert approached. "If you have come to apologize and resolve this legally, we are willing to listen." Richard nodded and entered. Seeing Sarah, he stopped with a fleeting expression of remorse. "Sarah, I am very sorry." My daughter stood still without answering. Richard turned to Robert and me. "At this point, I am not going to defend my wife or my son. I just hope we can stop this." Robert crossed his arms. "Stop it how?" "A quick and amicable divorce. We accept paying compensation." He pulled up a chair. "How much?" Richard swallowed. $25,000. Robert let out a frozen laugh. $25,000 for 40 slaps? For a hellish wedding night? Richard blushed. "We are also in a very difficult situation." I looked him in the eyes. "That difficulty was created by you yourselves. My daughter is not a sacrifice." Richard kept silent for a good while and then lowered his voice. "Then, what do you want?" Robert replied without hesitation. "Immediate divorce, Sarah's assets intact. Furthermore, compensation for moral damages according to the law, and one more condition." "What condition?" "A public apology." Richard stood stone still. "Public?" "Yes, public. Acknowledging the assault." Silence took over the room. Richard lowered his head with trembling hands. "If I do that, the company will sink completely." Robert looked at him with a cold but clear voice. "Then you should think about how much longer your company will last if this drags on." Suddenly, Sarah spoke. "I don't want your money." Robert and I turned to look at her. "I just want the divorce, my freedom, and for no one from your family to ever appear in my life again." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. Richard looked at her for a long time and then nodded. "Agreed. I will convince my wife," Robert emphasized. "It's not convincing, it's forcing her." After Richard left, Sarah sat down sighing. "Mom, I never want to see them again." "I know. It's almost over, but I was too optimistic." That same afternoon, a video suddenly appeared on the internet. In it, Mrs. Vance cried inconsolably in front of the camera with a haggard face. "I am Sarah's mother-in-law. I want to clarify that I did not give her 40 slaps. We only had an argument, a slight struggle. She, angry, self-harmed to then slander my family." Watching the video, my hands froze. Sarah, beside me, trembled from head to toe. "Mom, they say that I—" Robert turned off the video. "They are playing their last card." The lawyer called just after. "They want to divert public opinion toward the idea that Sarah self-harmed." "It's ridiculous," I said, laughing bitterly. "Ridiculous, but dangerous. If we don't react in time, There will be people who believe it. Robert nodded. Prepare the medical reports. I want to bring it all to light. That night, Sarah didn't touch a bite. She curled up in bed. Mom, what if people believe them? I took her hand. Listen to me. The truth may walk slowly, but it never disappears. Robert entered. Tomorrow I will present more evidence and request urgent precautionary measures from the court. Sarah looked at him with red eyes. I'm so tired. He sat opposite her. I know, but just a little more effort. Outside, black clouds gathered, and the wind blew in gusts. I felt a great storm was coming. The Vance family was cornered, and a wounded beast attacks with the most ferocity. I only hoped that after this storm, my daughter could finally walk toward the light. Mrs. Vance's video spread faster than I imagined. In a single night, it appeared in all groups and forums. Some felt sorry for her, others doubted, and not a few started criticizing Sarah. I read the comments and felt a knot in my stomach. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Daughters-in-law these days are trouble. Sarah read a couple of lines and broke down crying. She hugged a pillow, curled up just like the first night she came home with the bloodied dress. Mom, I'm exhausted. I don't want to look at the internet anymore. I sat next to her, hugging her tightly. You don't have to read anything. Now you just have to rest. But saying it was easy. The reality was that public opinion didn't forgive. The next morning, when opening the door to pick up a package, I met the curious stares of some neighbors. No one said anything, but those looks weighed on me. Robert arrived earlier than usual with another thick folder under his arm. The lawyer has prepared everything. The what? The counterattack, he said concisely. I knew we could no longer just keep defending ourselves. We went to the lawyer's office. Sarah wore a cap and mask, but even so, someone recognized her. She lowered her head and walked fast. I took her hand, feeling it frozen. The lawyer spread the documents on the table. This is the complete forensic report. The bruises show repeated external impact. It is impossible that she did them to herself. Robert nodded. Publish it all. The lawyer continued. We also have the recording of the threatening call from Mrs. Vance. I stood stone still. What call? The one from that day she insulted her, demanding she withdraw the complaint. I remembered it. Turns out, the lawyer had activated automatic call recording. And there's more. The lawyer opened another file. We have the statement of an employee from the hotel where the wedding was held. They heard screams and crying in the bridal suite. Sarah raised her head with her eyes wide open. Really? The lawyer nodded. Someone contacted us voluntarily. They couldn't stand seeing how Mrs. Vance was defaming you. I let out a long sigh. For the first time in days, I saw the light more clearly. In the afternoon, the lawyer organized a press appearance, but very controlled, no emotional interviews, no wailing, just the presentation of evidence. Robert made a brief statement. We do not want to turn a private matter into a spectacle, but when the truth is twisted, we are forced to speak. Afterward, the lawyer presented the forensic report, the photos, the recording, the witness statements. The press room fell silent. I saw some journalists frown, others sigh. The news was published in a matter of hours. This time the headlines weren't ambiguous. Irrefutable proof of wedding night assault. Public opinion did a vertiginous flip. The comments doubting Sarah disappeared, replaced by a wave of indignation. Defaming the victim this way is of unheard of cruelty, and that mother-in-law still has the face to cry. Mrs. Vance's video was dismantled, every phrase analyzed, every inconsistency pointed out. Sarah in her room read the news for a good while. She kept silent and suddenly put down the phone. Mom, I feel lighter. I looked at her. Because you told the truth? At night, Robert's phone rang. He answered, and his face turned icy. Yes, agreed. When he hung up, he looked at me. They have summoned Mrs. Vance to testify again. This time they are considering preventive detention for investigation. I felt no joy, just a strange emptiness. And Jason? Summoned as an implicated person. Sarah heard it and trembled slightly. Mom, I don't want to see him. You won't have to see him, Robert said firmly. That night, Sarah and I were together in the kitchen. I made her a light soup. She ate slowly, spoonful by spoonful. Mom, what if that day I hadn't come home? If I had endured? I put down the spoon and looked her in the eyes. Sarah, listen to me. If that day you hadn't fled, you might not be sitting here today. She broke down crying. But this time in silence. I hugged her, patting her back. I don't need you to be strong. I just need you to be alive and safe. Outside, night fell over the illuminated city. In the gloom, I saw my daughter relax little by little. Late in the day, the lawyer sent a message. The Vance family requested a private meeting to renegotiate. Robert read it and smiled bitterly. They are starting to get scared. Are we going to go? I asked. He looked at me. We will go, but this time the conditions will be different. Sarah looked up. I don't want to yield anymore. Robert put a hand on her shoulder. It's not yielding, it's ending it. I understood the battle was reaching its decisive moment. Those who were once aggressive now showed their panic. And with the truth on our side, I knew the day Sarah would be truly free wasn't far. The meeting was set for the next morning at the lawyer's office. I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying images. The torn wedding dress, the bruises, the empty look of my daughter. Remembering her wedding night, I promised myself that whatever happened, this time I wouldn't allow Sarah to give even a millimeter more. In the morning, Sarah got up before me. She wore a simple white shirt and dark pants with her hair tied back. Looking at me, she smiled slightly. Mom, I'm okay. I nodded. Just hearing her say that made me feel strong enough to leave the house. The lawyer's office was on a busy street. When we arrived, the Vance family was already there. Richard, the father, was sitting at the head of the table looking tired, shoulders slumped. Beside him, Jason, in just a few days, had visibly lost weight, with deep circles under his eyes and no trace of his former confidence. Mrs. Vance wasn't there. Their lawyer broke the ice. We are here to find a solution that puts an end to all this peacefully. Robert stared at him. Peace must be based on truth. There was a tense silence. Richard cleared his throat. This has gone too far. I don't want my son or my family to continue involved in this scandal. Robert nodded. Neither do we. That's why the conditions are very clear. Our lawyer placed a draft on the table and slid it toward them. First, immediate divorce by mutual agreement without reconciliations or delays. Second, the assets in Sarah's name remain intact, without dispute. Third, compensation for moral damages according to the legal framework. And fourth, the Vance family must issue a written public apology, acknowledging the aggression. Richard read every line with his face increasingly contracted. A public apology? Is it necessary? It is necessary, Robert replied coldly. It is the price for defaming a victim. Jason kept his head down with hands clasped. Sir, I'm sorry. Sarah looked him directly in the eyes. For the first time since everything exploded, she spoke. Why are you sorry? Jason looked up with trembling lips. For not having protected you. Sarah nodded very slightly. You're right, but an apology doesn't erase what happened. She turned to me, and then to Robert. I don't ask for anything else. I just want to end this, the opposing lawyer whispered with Richard. A moment later, the man sighed. We accept the conditions, but we ask to reduce the compensation. Robert looked at our lawyer. What is the proposal? 50,000. Robert shook his head. 100,000. Not $1 less. Richard closed his eyes as if weighing the decision for a long time. Finally, he nodded. Agreed. The agreement was signed that same morning. When the pen rested on the paper, I felt a weight lift off me. Sarah sat staring at Jason's signature. It's over. I took her hand. A part, daughter, a part is over. That same afternoon, the divorce agreement was filed. The lawyer told us the process would be quick since there was overwhelming evidence. I looked at Sarah and saw that in her eyes there was no longer panic, but a very human, very real fatigue. That night I made a simple dinner. Sarah ate slowly, but finished it all. Suddenly she said, Mom, I feel like I just woke up from a long nightmare. I smiled. All nightmares have an ending. Robert's phone rang. He answered, nodding repeatedly. Yes, I know, thanks. When he hung up, he turned to us. Mrs. Vance has signed the apology. Tomorrow they will publish it. Sarah was somewhat surprised. Really? Really? She said nothing more. I understood that for her, that apology wasn't so important anymore. What she needed was peace. The next morning, the apology was published without tears, without victimhood, just a cold text acknowledging the aggression and asking forgiveness for the false information spread. The public reaction was intense, but this time, no one blamed Sarah. I saw my daughter read the news very fast and then turn off the phone. "Mom, I don't want to read anymore." "No need, honey." The following days, everything went as agreed. The compensation was transferred, and the divorce proceedings were completed ahead of schedule. With the decree in hand, Sarah stood in silence for a good while. "Mom, I'm free, right?" I hugged her. "Yes, daughter, you are free." At night, Robert was getting ready to leave. At the door, he stopped and looked at Sarah. "Dad is sorry. If I had been stronger in the past, maybe you wouldn't have had to go through so much." Sarah shook her head. "Don't say that, Dad. You arrived when I needed you most." Robert nodded with red eyes. When the door closed, Sarah and I sat in the living room. Outside, the city was still noisy, but inside the house, for the first time in a long time, pleasant silence reigned. I knew the legal battle was almost over, but Sarah's healing journey had only just begun, and I would be by her side, step by step, until she smiled for real again. After finalizing the divorce papers, our small house sank into a strange tranquility. The incessant calls, the threatening messages, the outside curiosity ended. Everything seemed covered by a thin layer of calm that produced both relief and a sense of emptiness in me. Sarah spent more time at home without rushing to go back to work. The doctor recommended she rest to recover physically and mentally. I didn't pressure her. I knew there are wounds that need time. In the morning, I got up early to make her breakfast. She sat opposite, eating slowly, sometimes looking out the window. She spoke little, but she didn't shrink away anymore. Her gaze was still sad, but there was no panic. "Mom, I want to organize my room." I smiled. "Want to get rid of old things?" She nodded. "I don't want to see the suitcase I arrived with again." We started sorting at noon. I helped her classify her things. Items bought for the wedding, new clothes, gifts still with the tag. Everything went into boxes. There were things Sarah held for a good while before leaving them in the box. I didn't rush her. I let her decide this. Sarah held a small box containing the wedding ring. She looked at it a moment and gave it to me. "You keep it, Mom." I accepted it without asking. I knew there are things that need to be kept, not out of attachment, but because one isn't ready to let them go entirely yet. In the afternoon, Robert stopped by. He brought fruit and some documents. "I have to talk about something with you." Sarah looked up. "About what, Dad?" Robert sat down and said calmly, "I asked a manager to process legal protection for your condo. From now on, no one can touch it without your signature." Sarah stood motionless. "Dad, I don't want you to worry about anything else related to assets. It is your right." Sarah nodded with red eyes. "Thanks, Dad." Robert looked at her with a soft voice. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just doing what I should have done a long time ago." After dinner, Robert left. At the door, he looked at me. "You've been through a lot." I shook my head. "The important thing is that she has overcome the worst." He nodded without saying more. That night, Sarah slept straight through until morning. Hearing her regular breathing relieved me enormously. I sat in the living room, made myself a cup of tea, and thought about the road traveled. Everything had been so fast, so intense. Even I hadn't had time to sort my own emotions. A few days later, Sarah proposed going out. "I want to take a walk." We chose a small coffee shop near home, quiet, without much noise. Sarah sat by the window, watching people pass. "Mom, I'm scared of running into someone I know." I put my hand on hers. "If you run into someone, you don't have to explain. You haven't done anything wrong." She nodded and took a deep breath. A waitress brought us the drinks. She looked at Sarah a little more than normal and smiled at her. "Take good care of yourself." Just that simple phrase made Sarah freeze. When the waitress left, my daughter lowered her head and silent tears fell. "Mom, I didn't expect that." I squeezed her hand. Not everyone is insensitive. The following days, Sarah started resuming old habits. She went out walking with me in the morning, read in the afternoon, watched movies at night. One day, she laughed at a scene in a movie and startled herself as if she couldn't believe she was capable of laughing. I looked at her with a shrinking heart. One night she asked me, "Mom, do you regret anything?" "Of what? Of letting me decide so much on my own?" I thought a moment. "I don't regret it. I only regret not having been firm enough to get you out of there sooner." Sarah shook her head. "If I hadn't lived it, maybe I never would have woken up." She paused and added, "I don't believe in marriage like before anymore." I looked at her without arguing. "You don't have to believe now. You just have to believe in yourself." Sarah smiled. A shy but real smile. A few weeks later, she received an email from her old company asking when she could rejoin. She thought about it a lot and told me, "Mom, I want to quit the job." "Why?" "I want to change. I want to start over." I nodded. "If that's what you need, I support you." Sarah started looking for short courses. She said she wanted to study design, something she had liked but abandoned for family life. I saw a different light in her eyes, not of enthusiasm, but of hope. One night, while we were watching TV, her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen and tensed. "It's Jason." I looked at her. "Do you want to answer?" She kept silent for a few seconds, and then shook her head. "No, I have nothing to say to him." She declined the call and put the phone aside. I let out a long sigh. At that moment, I knew Sarah had truly crossed a door, not because she had forgotten, but because she had chosen not to go back. Night fell. Lying in bed, I listened to the crickets outside. I no longer felt the weight from before. I understood my daughter's road was still long, but at least she wasn't trapped in pain anymore. And I, as a mother, only hoped to accompany her slowly, firmly, to make up for the days she was lost in the dark. Sarah began her new days with a quiet routine. Gone were the rushed mornings and the pressure to prove anything to anyone. She got up early, made me a pot of tea, and went out to the balcony to breathe fresh air. I watched her from behind and noticed her back straighter, her steps firmer, although sometimes she stood still for a long time, as if having a dialogue with herself. "Mom, I've already enrolled in the design course." I smiled. "When do you start?" "Next week." Her voice didn't tremble anymore, and that reassured me. On Sarah's first day of class, I didn't accompany her. She said she wanted to go out alone. Before leaving, she stopped at the door and looked at me. "Mom, if I come back late, it's okay. Do what you want." I nodded, and she closed the door. I stared at the door for a while, feeling a mix of worry and pride. At noon, I received a message from her. "Mom, the class is great. I don't feel out of place." I read it, and my eyes moistened. The following days, Sarah was busier. She studied, did assignments, researched. Sometimes, she stayed up late, but coming out of her room, I no longer saw an exhausted face, but a different concentration. One night she sat next to me and opened the laptop. "Mom, look at this." I looked at the screen. I didn't understand much about lines and colors, but I saw how her eyes shone when talking about her project. "I don't understand much, but I see you're very serious about this." Sarah smiled. "I feel that way too." That smile wasn't radiant, but it was sincere. Meanwhile, the echo of the past story hadn't disappeared entirely. Sometimes an acquaintance asked carelessly, "Hey, and your daughter?" I responded briefly. "It's all over now." Sarah didn't avoid those questions anymore. She kept quiet when necessary. She spoke clearly when she wanted. I saw she was learning to set limits. One afternoon, Robert stopped by. He brought some documents, but we didn't talk about work. He looked at Sarah and asked, "How are you feeling, Sarah?" She thought a moment. "I'm still scared, but I don't feel useless anymore." Robert nodded. "That is enough." I looked at father and daughter and felt an inner calm. Maybe the fractures of our past were healing in another way, not going back, but through understanding. One night, Sarah stayed on the balcony for a long time. I brought her a glass of warm milk. "Mom, sometimes I still dream about that night." My sound was careful. "And what do you do?" "I wake up with my heart racing, but I don't cry anymore. I tell myself it's over." I took her hand. "That is healing, daughter. It's not forgetting, it's facing." Sarah nodded with a lost gaze. "Before I thought I was weak, and now I know that being weak isn't wrong. What's wrong is letting others trample you." I added nothing more. I knew she had learned her own lesson. One day, Sarah received an email from a classmate inviting her to a small project. She showed me, "Mom, They proposed I collaborate. I smiled. And what do you think? I feel like I'm useful. That sentence shrank my heart, because I remembered how useless she had felt before. The following nights, Sarah started going out more, sometimes to study in a group, sometimes just to walk. Every time she returned, she told me small anecdotes. I didn't feel that unease from before anymore. Once Sarah asked me, "Mom, have you ever regretted divorcing?" I thought about it for a good while. Sometimes I've felt sad, but I've never regretted it. Why? Because thanks to that decision, I learned to fend for myself, and thanks to that, I was strong enough to protect you. Sarah looked at me with red eyes. I wish I could be as strong as you. I smiled. You already are. You just realized it. At the end of the month, Sarah finished her first course. She brought a small certificate and left it on the table. "Mom, I did it." I hugged her. "You did it a long time ago." That night, I stayed thinking. I thought about our journey from panic and fear to calm and hope. I understood that healing is not a destination, but a long road with advances and setbacks. But as long as Sarah didn't stay stuck in pain, it was enough. The next morning, Sarah told me something that surprised me. "Mom, I want to move out to live alone." I looked at her. "Are you sure?" "I want to try. I want to be independent, but close to you." I nodded with a heart divided between emotion and pride. "Agreed. When you need me, I'll be here." Sarah smiled, a serene smile, without a trace of fear. I knew my daughter was truly opening a new chapter in her life. Sarah's decision to move came sooner than I expected. She didn't say it in an outburst, nor as an escape. She said it with a very calm voice, as if she had meditated on it for a long time. "Mom, I want to be responsible for my own life." I looked at her with a mixture of worry, affection, and pride. "Where do you plan to live?" "I found a small apartment near the design school, not far from here." I nodded. "Okay, but one thing." Sarah looked at me. "When you need me, I will always be here." She smiled with a warm look. "I know." We started seeing apartments on the weekend. Sarah wasn't looking for luxury, just an orderly, safe place with light. She stayed a good while on the balcony of a small apartment on the 6th floor looking at a tree-lined street. "Mom, I like this place." "Why?" "Because I feel like I can breathe here." I understood that after everything, what she needed most wasn't comfort, but a sense of security. The day she signed the lease, she read every clause herself. I stood aside without intervening. I saw she was learning to protect herself with lucidity, not with fear. At night we did the move. There wasn't much, some boxes of clothes, books, and a small plant Sarah loved. She picked up each object and packed it carefully. "Mom, I'm not taking the wedding ring." I nodded. "You can leave it if you want." Sarah put it in a drawer and closed it without tears, without doubts, just a serene ending. The day of the move, Robert also came to help. He didn't speak much, just carried boxes and gave her some advice. Before leaving, he looked at Sarah and said with a grave voice, "If anything happens to you, call me." Sarah nodded. "I will." When the door to her new apartment closed, I stood in the small living room, looking around. Everything was empty, but the sun came in. I turned to my daughter. "How do you feel?" "A little scared." I smiled. "It's normal to be afraid. But you aren't alone." The first days, Sarah wasn't used to it. She called me every night to tell me trivial things. "Mom, the food came out salty." "Mom, the living room light flickers." I listened with patience. I knew it wasn't weakness, but her way of getting used to independence. After a week, the calls became less frequent. Sarah was busier. She started accepting small design jobs. She told me by message, "Mom, I already have my first client." I read it with immense joy. One afternoon I went to visit her. The apartment already had more plants and some pictures hanging. Sarah made me tea. She looked different, more orderly and confident. "You look better." She looked at me. "I feel that way too." We stayed in silence for a while. Suddenly she said, "Mom, someone wrote to me to meet." I wasn't surprised. "And how do you feel?" "I'm in no hurry. We just talk as friends." I nodded. "You don't have to prove anything." Sarah smiled. "I know. I just want to know how far I can open up." That night, returning to my house, I felt it emptier, without her steps, without hearing her open her room door. I sat on the sofa and sighed. I missed her, but I wasn't sad. I knew it was a healthy nostalgia. A few days later, I received a call from an unknown number. "Hello, are you Sarah's mother?" "Yes, it's Jason." I kept silent for a few seconds. "Why are you calling?" I just wanted to know if Sarah is okay." His voice sounded exhausted. "You don't need to ask. She is much better having nothing to do with you." On the other end, there was silence. "I'm sorry," I responded slowly. Apologies that arrive late usually serve no purpose. I hung up without hesitation. When I told Sarah, she only nodded. "I'm not angry anymore, Mom. I just don't want to go back." I looked at her and felt great relief. For her, forgiving wasn't returning, but letting go. One night at the end of the month, Sarah called me. "Mom, are you coming to dinner at my house this weekend?" I smiled. "You cooking?" "Yes, I want to invite you." The dinner was simple. Vegetable soup, baked fish, dishes she had just learned to make. Sarah, sitting opposite me, smiled more. "Mom, thanks." "Why?" "For not living my life for me, but always being there when I needed you." I was left speechless. "You've grown." Sarah nodded. "I'm learning to grow again." Leaving, I stopped at the door and turned to look at her. Sarah was standing, and the light drew a serene silhouette on her face. Suddenly, I realized my daughter had truly left my shelter, not due to distance, but because she was already strong enough. On the way home, I thought a lot. Maybe the greatest happiness of a mother isn't having her children by her side, but seeing them strong enough to walk by themselves. Time passed, and with every day Sarah lived alone, I noticed a change in her. She no longer bit her nails from nervousness, nor looked at the world through the veil of fear. Every day she went to her design classes, participated in small projects, and little by little rebuilt her life from the foundations. One day, she read me a message from her phone. "Thanks for your help on the last project. I hope we can collaborate again. How do you feel?" I asked. Sarah smiled with a special shine in her eyes. "I feel like I have worth." That was an immense change. I remembered how before any difficulty made her hide, convinced she wasn't capable. But now she had learned to face challenges. I went to visit her at her apartment. The space didn't seem empty anymore, but full of life. Sarah was at her desk with the laptop open. "What are you doing?" "I'm designing a small collection for a shop." I looked at the screen. Although I wasn't an expert, I noticed a care and professionalism she didn't have before. "You've truly changed." She looked up and smiled. "Because I don't want to be the weak person always." I sat next to her and took her hand. "You are much stronger than you think." But despite her strength, I remained worried. Heart wounds don't heal so easily. A few weeks later, Jason called again. "Ma'am, it's me, Jason. I want to see Sarah." "What for?" "To ask for forgiveness. I've thought about everything a lot." This time his voice wasn't threatening or evasive. He sounded genuinely repentant. I thought a moment and responded, "You have to discuss that with her. I don't decide." "Thanks, ma'am." When I told Sarah, she looked at me calmly. "I don't want to see him." "Sure?" "Sure." I kept silent. I understood she was strong enough not to return to the past. Time followed its course. Sarah became a woman of whom I felt immensely proud. Work and studies absorbed her. Her small projects gave way to bigger opportunities. "Mom, they offered me a position at an important studio." "Really?" "Yes. They saw my designs and want me to join their team." I looked at her with shining eyes. "You did it, Sarah." One night she returned late from work, sat next to me with a mix of fatigue and determination. "Mom, I want to tell you something. I want to go far away." "Far away?" She nodded. "I want to study somewhere else. I need to learn more to grow." I wasn't surprised. I knew someday she would do it. "I've already been looking into it." I looked her in the eyes, feeling her determination. "Are you ready?" "I'm ready." I hugged her. "Then go, daughter. Let nothing stop you from fulfilling your dreams." The day Sarah prepared to leave, I didn't cry. I understood that however far she was, my heart would always be with her. Never again would she have to face life alone. That trip wasn't just a step in her career, but the definitive proof that she had come out of the darkness to find her own light. Sarah's story is not only that of finding herself, but that of all those who have the courage to face the past, to walk forward without looking back. And I, as a mother, will always be the port she can return to when she needs an anchor. The day Sarah left, I watched her from the airport window, dragging her suitcase. She didn't look back, but I knew her heart was full of emotions. Only a few months ago, she was on the verge of despair, and now she was facing the world. I felt a part of me leaving, but also that a new faith was born. Sarah had matured through her falls. The first month, I barely received calls, only short messages. "Mom, I'm fine, don't worry." It was all I needed to hear. A month later, she sent me a painting painted by her first work in an art course. It was simple, but conveyed a freshness and light reflecting her new way of seeing herself. One day, she called with a voice full of energy. "Mom, they offered me a real job." "Yes? Where?" "In a big design studio in Manhattan. They want me to join their team." I smiled with a lump in my throat. "You did it, Sarah. I'm so proud. I wanted to thank you, Mom. Without you, I never would have made it here. Don't thank me, daughter. I've just been here for you." The new job wasn't easy, but she didn't give up. She wasn't the girl looking for security anymore, but the one leaving her comfort zone in search of opportunities. Shortly before I went to visit her, she called. "Mom, I have a surprise. I signed the permanent contract, and I'm going to participate in an international project." When I arrived in New York, her apartment was a creative studio. "I love being here, Mom." I saw a completely different Sarah. She wasn't lost or scared anymore. She was a creator. "You achieved it." She smiled with radiant confidence. "I still have a lot to learn, but I feel stronger." That night dining with her, I saw she wasn't the girl who fled anymore, but a brave and resilient woman, my Sarah. Tomorrow she had an important project, but that night I just wanted to enjoy watching her grow. I knew that whatever she did, I would always be her home. And I had also learned from her to face difficulties and start over. Ours wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. And I knew we would both keep walking, sometimes under the storm, but always finding the light at the end. Time flew. Sarah had been in New York for over a year, consolidating her career. Her calls were full of stories about trips, friends, and creative projects. Yesterday she called euphoric. "Mom, I've been invited to a big design exhibition in Milan." "How wonderful. You're incredible." "I'm so happy. I can't believe it, Mom. Without you, none of this would be possible." I stayed silent, moved. Those words from a girl who before didn't dare face anything were the proof of her strength. "What do you have to prepare?" "Just go. Mom, trust me. I trust you." After the call, I felt at peace. I remembered the dark days and knew all the suffering had had a purpose. A few days later, she sent me a photo from Milan. She was standing next to one of her works in a simple black dress and a smile of serene confidence. It wasn't just a painting. It was her journey from pain to passion. I saved the photo. Although she was far away, I felt her close. One weekend I met with some old friends. One asked me, "I heard Sarah is a famous designer in New York, right?" I smiled and nodded. "She is doing things I didn't even imagine." "And you always supported her, didn't you?" I looked at her securely. "Yes, I always believed in her." I knew that after overcoming so much pain, she would become stronger than ever. A month later, Sarah returned home. She was at the door with the suitcase. Her eyes shone more securely than ever. "Mom, I'm back. You're back." She hugged me. "I wanted to come home for a while. My home is where you are." I hugged her, feeling profound peace. We dined together, watching the golden autumn leaves fall. I knew that however far she flew, we would always have a place to return to. Sarah smiled, looking out the window. "Mom, I've never felt as strong as now. I've learned to stay on my feet." I hugged her and felt no worry anymore. My daughter had grown, and I knew that wherever life took her, she would always remain that firm.